And then you moved into a label that I think I always identify as being an American label, but you might put me right, which is Matador.
Mm-hmm.
What was the story there? What is it, an American label?
It is an American label. This is down to our American growth. We originally had some people representing us in America who did pretty well for us, and we had a label deal, and we did a lot of label licenses and artist licenses in the days that was the way you released records in America. And then we started gradually building our own label, and we flew someone who worked for us here over to there to set it up for us, and we had an operation with like 5 or 6 people, and we lost quite a lot of money for quite a few years. But did okay, but it's really hard starting off in America. And then we were approached by Matador, who were a much bigger label in America than us, but a much smaller label than us here, and they wanted a partner and some funding, and we reached an arrangement whereby we became partners with them, and we kind of combined forces in America. And they had their A&R people, we had A&R people, but all the central people worked for both labels. And that kind of made us a local label rather than an intruder, and was really, looking back on it, the trigger for our growth in America. Because as soon as we did our deal with them, they signed Interpol, and Interpol had a record that went gold in America.
So what were the other artists that came through from Matador?
Cat Power, Yoda Tango, both of whom are still on the label.
Yeah.
Pavement.
And the people that owned Matador, did they continue to be involved in Matador?
Yeah, and they still are.
And they still are?
Absolutely, and they're still my partners.
And then in 2007, Rough Trade, which is one of the seminal independent labels that everybody would be aware of, you went into a partnership with Rough Trade, and they, I think, had come out of some pretty miserable business situations. I think Jeff Travis, when he was here a couple of years ago, was one of the first people to admit that music might be his speciality, but business might not necessarily be top of his list of skills. So how did that come about? You really, I suppose it was meeting of the two biggest names in British independent music to the outsider.
I'd known Jeff for 20 years. I mean, when we were first, we're not quite in the first days of the record label, but within a year or two, they were a record store in Notting Hill and a distributor, and I used to drive records round to the back of the Rough Trade store and sell them to him. So I know we'd been on parallel tracks for years and years, and we certainly knew and respected each other. And we talked once or twice about doing things together, and it never kind of quite seemed right. It kind of seemed that it would be too much the same thing being done twice. And then one day I was sitting across the AIM board table, we were both directors of the Association of Independent Music, and it was pretty clear at that point their sanctuary situation, their funding situation was falling apart. And I was sitting across the table looking at him, knowing that he was looking for a new setup. I thought, what about it? Why not?
Why not?
and so I said to him, why don't we talk? And we talked, and I met his partner, Jeanette Lee, and we all got on, and it just felt right. And it came together very easily.
And we could just focus on that for a second, because there you've got a situation where you've got somebody who's got an incredibly strong musical vision. In fact, two people. Rough Trade isn't just Jeff Travis, it's Jeanette Lee, who you've mentioned, who was, I think, the bass player in Public Image Limited. And they've got an incredible musical vision and amazing taste. So how do you work in a situation like that where you leave them free to be creative? What do you bring to it, and how do you not end up sort of clashing?
Well, what you're talking about now is the structure of the Beggars Group today, which is essentially an umbrella organisation which I run, which shelters 4 labels, in 3 of which I'm a partner, one of which I own in its entirety, which is 4AD. Right. And they all have complete autonomy, music-wise. Obviously, they talk to me about what they want to sign. They talk to me about where their signings are going. They don't have to, but they do. I obviously have an input in the deals, because I'm the person behind the scenes to make sure it all works and hangs together and doesn't lose money. So we talk about deals all the time. But I would never tell the labels what to sign, and I would never tell them what to do. And we have serious discussions about whether we can continue with an artist, for example. Yeah. And we have really serious discussions about how things are going with artists. But they're completely autonomous. They can do what they want.
And I mean, I know that you're a big music fan. I mean, how could you not be? But at what point in the evolution of Beggars did you start to step away from the creative part of it? Because presumably at the beginning you were very much involved in that.
Probably when we first hired an A&R person, which actually was a guy called Terry Hollingsworth, who I think is here. Terry? There he is. So when we hired Terry signed The Mighty Wah and The Fall, and that was the point at which I stopped signing artists, and Terry and his successors did. And frankly, you can't do that all your life. You have to be able to delegate it, and you have to bring on new people. And I think the important thing is to find people that are connected with music and can build a relationship with artists and bring them in. And
how much are artists looking for in a relationship with someone in your position?
Support, really.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I support all our artists. Obviously, I love some more than others. Some I know much more than others. Some are artists I hardly ever meet. Some I meet all the time. I mean, some talk to me all the time. Some don't.
Yeah.
But that's because their primary relationship is with a label. So I kind of make it work behind the scenes. I like to see myself as being invisible.
So how would you, for instance, I'm going to dwell on this, how would you deal with Mark E. Smith of The Fall then? What relationship would you have had with him? Because Terry's obviously to blame for bringing him to the label.
I mean, Mark,
he's a famously diplomatic man.
Not Mark. Mark is a genius, actually, and I worked quite closely with Mark and with Terry, and ultimately he left us and went to a major and hoped things would happen for him that didn't. But I think the period of time that The Fall had with us and the 6 albums they released with us were absolutely amazing, and he's an incredibly perverse character, obviously, incredibly stimulating person to work with. Not the most cheerful dressing room after the show experience.
What are, really? Okay, and then in 2010 you had your first #1 album in America.
Yeah.
As Rough Trade. In fact, before that, were you involved in any #1 albums in America that went out through other labels?
Yeah, Fat of the Land was #1, but that was licensed to Maverick and Warner's. So
right.
It's only in the last 10 years or so we've started having real success on our own in America, rather than sub-licensing to a major. And frankly, doing it on your own is much more fun.
Yeah.
And much more successful and profitable when you get it right. And we'd done pretty well with, so both Interpol albums went gold, and we'd had some, pretty successful albums, but the Vampire Weekend album on XL, which is the one you're referring to, which went to #1 last January, was pretty remarkable, really. And one of the remarkable things about it, and this is kind of skipping ahead, is that it's digital sales, which we control out of here worldwide, and the sales to the independent stores, which we do ourselves, would have been sufficient to make it #1 without the distribution deal we had with ADA, which is an independent division of Warner's, to get into the regular stores. So it would have been #1 completely self-distributed.
Wow.
And then we had a #3 later in the year with a national as well. So, it was a big year for us.
No, absolutely. So British independent labels, historically, that have set themselves up in America, or set up their own operations in America, have very often tried and failed before they tried and failed several times.
Yep.
and one or two succeeded. I think
Yep.
Virgin eventually succeeded, but fell apart a couple of times before that. So did you learn from experiences of those other independent labels, and what sort of things did you learn in the way that you set up Beggars in America?
I think the difference with us is we've always been musical specialists. We're an alternative music label. We don't do pop music. I mean, Adele is as pop as we get, and you could well say that Adele is pop, but Adele is right on the right wing of what we do musically. But essentially, we're an alternative music label, so we don't need the tools and resources to access straight-on competitive pop marketing with the majors. So whereas Chrysalis and Virgin had to staff up and hire loads of radio people to get music on top 40 radio stations, we weren't even trying to get music on top 40 radio stations.
Right.
So our horizons were different. Plus, of course, the internet, which again I'm sure we'll get to later, came along, and suddenly the way in which you got music across was different. So I think we're fortunate in that we did it at a time that we did it, rather than at a time that Virgin and Chrysalis did it. It means you can do it with much smaller resources as long as you know what you're doing and as long as you know where your audience is.
No, and so the bringing us completely up to date now. You mentioned Adele, so Adele is breaking all sorts of ridiculous records, and has been 9 weeks at number one, not consecutively, but 9 weeks at number one in America.
And 15 here.
And 15 weeks at number one, thank you for reminding me, in the UK, which is remarkable. Not exactly the type of artist that you would necessarily identify with XL and Beggars. But I personally think that although you could imagine her being on another label, what you have brought to what she does has given it what it need, what has made it so successful, has given it that extra bit. But what do you think you've brought? Because this is something where you've moved slightly out of, if you do have a comfort zone, the zone that you're known for anyway. And what is it that XL have brought to Adele that perhaps Warner's or Sony or EMI or Universal would have done differently?
I think you put the answer in the question, really.
I probably did. What was the question again?
What have XL brought being XL to it?
Yeah.
The fact that she's on XL means people perceive her differently than if she was on Psycho. Obviously, her music has an edge to it that most pop artists don't. Remember, when we signed her, the first tracks we came up with were like Hometown Glory and Chasing Pavements, which were, had a significant edge to them, and she definitely has an edge to her. She's a real artist. And she definitely belongs on XL, even if she's over to one side of it, and you have Odd Future way over on the other side of it, which is a long way away. She fits, and I think the fact that she's on XL is great for XL and great for her. But having said that, it's one of those records which she did an amazing job, the manager did an amazing job, we did an amazing job, but none of that sells you 6.5 million records in 15 weeks. Yeah, it just blew up.
So it's a real phenomenon, but it's interesting that at this point now, if you actually, like me, look every week at the Music Week chart shares, and I am that boring, you will see that the share of the market or share of the chart market that Beggars have got has exceeded EMI's and has exceeded Warner's, and sometimes exceeded EMI and Warner's combined for most of the weeks of this year. So it's a ridiculous level that it's getting to, which is fantastic. But do you see dangers in that? And is there a danger of the expansion? How do you keep the expansion of Beggars Banquet under control from your point of view?
There are definitely dangers in it, and there are definitely problems associated with it. I mean, to a large extent, when you have that kind of success, as we did with Gary Newman and as we did with Prodigy, you have to park it as being a freak. It's just being something that just lightning in a bottle, whatever it is. And Richard and myself are very kind of rooted to saying, okay, well, what we're doing today is exactly the same as we were doing 6 months ago. We're discovering and breaking alternative, edgy, brilliant new artists, and that hasn't changed. And we don't have to reinforce it to our staff, but we do. That just because we've got the biggest record in the world doesn't mean we don't care as much about the record that's only doing 1,000 or 2,000. And it's just really important to stay focused on that. And I mean, obviously, the great thing is it proves that we can sell a big record as much as the biggest of the major companies with a fraction of the resources, and that's fantastic for the next artists that want to sign to us. And obviously, it raises our profile, which is great. But there are also dangers in perception being shifted in a way that's, because we're not the kind of record label that's going to release 10 Adeles in a year.
No,
we're simply not. And so we've got to remain rooted, basically.
Yeah.